All right, everybody, this is Troy Full with Pinnacle Investments. Once again, another episode of Propelio Academy. And I want to share with you one of the probably the most common questions that I get asked in the business, and that is like, what's the best deal and how do you structure it? And so I'm going to bring up during this episode what I would basically say is my kind of cheat sheet for comparison offers. And what I've got here is right in front of me, comparison offers with seller financing. So as I said, one of the biggest questions that I get asked on a regular basis is that people are always saying, well, if I do this rate and this term, what would it be? Or what would you give me? Or what would you pay for my note? And in my eyes, there's no easy answer. Going back to like episode number 1, one of the things that I love about this space is that it's all about creativity. I love the creativity aspect of it. But the challenging part is it's very creative, and people come up with a lot of ideas that go into what is, I've shared with you, is a legal binding agreement. And you don't want to, you don't want to learn that you did something, incorrect, and that cost you money way after the fact. You want to kind of learn those things in the very beginning, or at least, done your research as a whole. So what I've got here in front of me is what I call my comparison of offers with seller financing. And so oftentimes I'll get on the phone with a seller and they're asking me like, well, if I had this rate and this term, what would you pay for it? If I had this rate and that term, what would you pay for it? If I did this and then this, what would you give me for it? So this is one of those things that I can sit there and I say, okay, well, if I'm buying something, and first step here is investor cost of funds or fair rate, or also known as investor yields. So investor cost of funds is a little bit different, but what would the investor's, rate of return be? So I'm going to put this in here as something what I would call a very kind of middle of the board investor yield that an investor would look for. So like 10%. Now, do some investors buy notes at an 8% yield? Yes. Do some investors buy notes at say a 12% yield? Absolutely. Going back, and that's dictated by those 4 characteristics that I shared with you earlier: credit, down payment, terms, and rate. And so those things will absolutely determine whether or not an investor is like, I'll buy your note, but I'm buying it at a 12 yield. Or I'll buy your note, and it's so good, I'll buy it at an 8 yield. So we're going to use 10% for today's example. That being said, going back to all cash. Well, as I mentioned earlier, if you get an all cash offer, good for you. You should take that. Absolutely. Or if you get an all cash offer via institutional financing, hey, fantastic there too. You should take that as well. So we put that as offer number 1. Then we go to say offer number 2. So I'm going to back this up here a little bit, and I'm going to go back to our scenario that we were using earlier, $100,000. And I'm going to keep all of these at $100,000. Need another 0 there. And so if you're asking like, why are these all different? Well, it's because it was pre-populated before I pulled it up. Okay, so offer number 2, $100,000 sales price. That's the value of the property. You bought it for 40, you put 20 into it, you're 60 into it. You got a 40% equity margin in the deal, and now you're ready to sell it. So you've done your appraisal, you've done your inspection, you've done your termites, all that fun stuff. You don't necessarily need to do termites before you sell it, but hey, if you know they're there, you might as well get them fixed anyways. That being the case, sales price is $100,000. Cash, $100,000. Second offer, $100,000 with, I'm going to change this to 10% down, so $10,000. And then I'm going to leave that at 20, and I'm going to change this to say 30% down. Now, I know some of you out there saying, no, nobody's got that kind of money. Nobody's going to put that kind of down payment. I've never seen that before in my area. Play along with me. Role play with me. Work with me here, okay? Because these are just examples. And I've seen this all over the board. I've seen people, we looked at a note just the other day, $150,000 sales price. The borrower put down $50,000. So his note was only $100,000. So he put down basically 33% on his deal. Pretty substantial down payment. And that was just here in Texas, to be frankly honest with you. So going back here. So offer number 1, cash. Offer number 2, $100,000 sales price, $20,000 or $10,000 down, so 10% down, $90,000 first. Let me go down here. So setting that up at a 4% interest rate on 120-month terms makes that payment $911. Is that going to work with a borrower? I don't know. It depends on what kind of income the borrower has. It's different for everybody. Now, I know that we like to, look at things from a standpoint of saying, well, everybody's the same. Well, not everybody is the same, especially when it comes to monetary income, earnings, savings, investment models as a whole. So that gets back into the 1003, pulling their credit, things of that nature. At a 4%, 120 months, at a 911.21 payment amount, cash value of that note is $68,952. Now, if I scroll down a little bit more, if you created a note under those terms, your overall return or your overall cash in hand at the end of the day is $78,952. That's how much you would get out of that. Now, that being the case, is that good or bad? I don't know. If you only have $60,000 into the house, you sold it with seller financing, you can pay off your private money lender, you get your cash investment back, you get cash in your pocket on $78,000, you're up about $18,000, close to $19,000 profit on that deal. The number one question that comes into play, and this is always a big concern, is when you're doing a very short-term deal, say 120 months, is that affordable by the buyer? So you want to make sure that that's covered going in. What would happen if we changed this? What would happen if I went to, say, 7% and I went to 240 months? What would that look like? Well, 7% at 240 months actually drops the payment, okay? Drops the payment to $697.77, but increases your profits or increases your cash from $79,000, $78,000 to $82,000. So it jumps $3,000. Higher interest rate, longer term, smaller payment amount. Now, is that a better scenario? Well, yeah. One, it puts more money in your pocket. Number two, you've got a borrower's payment, you drop from $900 down to $697. So now it's probably much more affordable for the borrower. Yeah, the interest rate went up, but keep in mind, you're not doing seller financing, and I can't honestly tell you the last time I saw a seller financing deal with a prepayment penalty in it. So if this borrower gets in a situation where their credit is, say, north of 640, north of 650, and their job, they have a stable job, and they got bank statements and tax returns and all those fun things that banks require, now they can go back and they can easily refinance this property and cash out you, or they can cash out me, being the new owner of the note, but then they'll lower their payment even more so because their payment might lower to, say, what I would call traditional rates right now, or institutional rates are at about 4%. So it drop at $545. So it's going to drop at about $150 a month. Is that worthwhile for a homeowner to do that? I think that's a question for them, not for you and me. You and me, we look at it like, yeah, that's a great savings. But the question then for them is, are they prepared to do that as a whole? So that's one scenario. That's a $10,000, 10% down payment scenario. Let's say we use that same scenario, but with $20,000 down, okay? Like I said earlier, remember what I said earlier in the earlier episodes about, hey, the more you get down, that means the less you're going to take a discount on. So this being the case, 7%, 240 months, payment $620, okay? The other one's $697, $64,000, okay? Because it's an $80,000 note. That looks smaller because it's at $64,000. But the truth is the balance of the note is $80,000. So you're starting with a smaller balance. Overall, the note seller, you, is going to net $84,272, whereas on the other one, you're netting $82,306. Once again, less money to take a discount on, puts more money in your pocket, which puts a much more solid deal together. Now, keep in mind, these are all hypothetical, okay? People will often ask me, what determines yields? What determines this? What determines that? Well, at the end of the day, what determines my yield or any other note investor's yield is cost of capital and risk, okay? Our cost of capital changes every single day because it's typically tied into LIBOR or the Wall Street Journal. It's a fluctuating rate. So it's constantly up and down. So if I tell you one number today, it's probably going to be a different number tomorrow as a whole. Now, do they spike? Do they go like from 3% to 5% overnight? No, but it does fluctuate in small increments of 10 basis points, 25 basis points as a whole. Now, option number 3 or scenario number 3. Well, sorry, scenario number 4, because scenario number 1 was an all cash deal. Scenario number 4, if you came in here and you did say 7% on 180 months, okay, 180 months, 7% at 180 months, so not quite 240, but the payment's only $629. So the payment's only about $9 different, okay, from $620 from the scenario number 3, but you're getting $58,000, but at the end, you're coming up with $88,550 as a whole. This better answers the question on what an investor would pay for a deal based on the terms that are used in the deal. Now keep in mind, what dictates what ultimately ends up happening is you. Why is it you? Because you're the captain of your ship. This is your house. You bought it. You fixed it. You've got fiduciary responsibilities to your credit cards that you put money on. You've got fiduciary responsibilities to your investors who put up the money to buy the house. And you've got fiduciary responsibilities to your contractors. So you're the captain of your ship. What you dictate to happen is what's ultimately going to happen. Now, what always scares me about that statement is when people take it and they go way, way, way off course on it, or they come to me and say, Troy, I'm going to do 120 months and I want this at 9% interest rate. Okay, well, if you do 120 months at a 9% interest rate on somebody who's only put down 10%, see here, 9%, 120 months. The question is, now all of a sudden, can they afford that? Can they afford that? Now, that comes into a question for you versus them. Oftentimes, the homeowner will say, yeah, I can afford that. But you have to sometimes do the thinking for them. And if they're agreeing to $1,100 a month payment and they're only making $3,000 a month income, that's a recipe for disaster. And you need to like slow that train up, go back to something more reasonable, and ultimately something that creates that win-win scenario. If there's not a win-win, somebody's going to lose, and chances are it's going to be you. Now, the dark side of our business, let me just touch on this real quick. The dark side of our business is people will ignore those tips. They'll ignore those, insight. And they'll go ahead and do something their way. And then they want to hand that ball off to me or somebody else. Well, I'm here to tell you, this isn't my first rodeo, and the guys in this business, this isn't their first rodeo either. And they're going to pick up on these things, and they're going to become red flags behind the scenes and things like that. And ultimately, your deal won't get purchased, and you're going to have already spent that money in your mind, or you're going to have already committed that money to another project, and yet all of this will come out during the due diligence process, whether it's in title, whether it's in valuation, whether it's, whatever it may be, whether it's in pay history. If somebody can't afford $1,100 a month payment, guess what? We can figure that out pretty quickly, because if their payment's due on the 1st and they're constantly paying it on the 10th, 11th, the 12th, that means that they're pooling their money together and they need a little more time to do that. And that ultimately will be an indicator as to, hey, they're in over their heads here. And that, unfortunately, is just a recipe for disaster. So do this. Set it up for a win. Set it up so that they get what they want, you get what you want, and you can accomplish those goals day in and day out with the business. Be flexible in your terms. I showed you how to put up terms for marketing, but be open to hearing what the seller has. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with it. You're a business person. I'm a business person. We want to make good choices. We want to put good product out there. Keep in mind, me as a note investor, anybody else that's out there as a note investor, we're here to buy good quality product. So it's your responsibility to create good quality product for us to buy, if in fact you want us to buy it. It only makes sense, right? So this is a little software that we use. It's nothing more than an Excel spreadsheet, but it's one that actually answers a lot of questions. It answers a lot of questions. And let me show you another scenario here and we'll wrap this up. So if you do offer number 1 at 7% at 120 months, and I'm gonna go right up here real quick, do $10,000 as a down payment. $10,000 down payment. And we do them all at, say, 7%, but I'm going to change this to 180 months and 240 months. And I'm doing this as an example because oftentimes people will think that there's huge changes. And in some cases there are. Case in point, 7%, 120 months, you'd walk away with $89,000. 7% at 240 months, you walk away with $82,000. But the payment's $697 versus $1,044. What might be a happy medium? 7% at 180 months, $808 is the payment, and then $85,000 would be your walkaway money on that deal. So it gives you a really close understanding of how just small fractions can make big impacts as a whole. Do yourself a favor. Don't run out and do 9% on 60 months or 120 months, because chances are that'll be a really tough deal to sell in the open marketplace for a number of reasons, but the biggest one being that after this last downturn in the economy, everybody took losses. Everybody took huge losses. And those memories are really fresh in our minds. And when you take the kind of losses that our industry did and that your industry did and the fix and flip industry did, those are things that you're not easily going to forget. And therefore, when you see indicators that resemble that kind of behavior, you're going to have a tendency to walk away. Case in point, that there's a lot of conversation right now about stated income, stated asset loans coming back. So people are looking around going, hey, here's the next crash. It's coming. But the truth is, those are stated income, stated asset loans. There's only about 10 billion of them in the marketplace, whereas before it was around 2 trillion of them in the marketplace. So we got a long ways to go, but it still brings back memories as a whole. Well, that same thing is true on this side. Why am I sharing this kind of stuff with you? Because if you do it up front in the right way, then you can easily exit it on the backside the best way. All right, that being said, we'll see you guys on the next episode of Podelio Academy. Take care.